So we'll start. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. Today, we're going to talk about Priorat. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Miquel Hudin to this meeting. Miquel has published books featuring wine regions as far as wide as the Dalmatian coast of Croatia and Stellenbosch in South Africa. But in recent years, he's known primarily for his books about what nowadays is the home wine region of Priorat and the Catalan regions. And as well as that, he's a regular judge and a contributor for the Canter magazine, as well as the World of Fine Wine. He's a regular speaker in international wine conferences. It's worth mentioning that Miquel had started his wine career in his original county of Napa Valley. He's originally from California. It was in the Inglenook winery, if I'm right. And it's yeah. So without further ado, it's I'll pass you the microphone, and you can start.
All right. Yeah. Well, hello everyone. Hello in a very weird way, of course, as we're now in this period of isolation and talking through these kinds of weird things. I haven't done any of these chats so far. This is actually the first one that I'm going to be doing, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It might be the last one, but we'll see how it goes. Normally this time of year, I would be probably welcoming a lot of people down here to Priorat, and we'd be having a good time. We'd be drinking a lot of wine. Tomorrow would actually be our annual wine fair in Priorat. That was obviously canceled quite a while back. So we don't have that. We're missing out on a lot of activities, and we're missing out on a lot of visitors, which is a real shame because it's a really lovely place this time of year, and obviously the wines are really quite excellent as well. So there's a lot of familiar names that I've seen here popping up, and I know a lot of you already know Priorat pretty well. Some of you live here, but for some people who maybe there's some new names that I don't know there, I'm gonna go over a little bit of Priorat, just kind of do as much of an overview as possible to give people sort of an idea of kind of the basic gist of Priorat, because it always amazes me how many people don't actually know it, because once I found it, I couldn't let go of it, which is probably part of the reason that I actually live here now. So I think we'd probably just get started with where is Priorat? And I am going to attempt to share a screen bit here. Where did that go? Here we go. And so, yep, there we go. All right. I assume everybody can see that. Yeah, it's up?
Yeah, it's on.
All right.
Yeah.
So here we have this is basically the little triangular chunk of northeastern Spain. You'll often read a lot of articles where they say it's northwestern Spain. Obviously, it's the east. Up in the top there, that's the border with France, and Catalonia is this little bit over here on the edge of it. Obviously, it sees a little bit of news coverage these days because of the various events going on. It's a very distinct region from the rest of Spain. I mean, in general, Spain is actually a lot of very distinct regions, and has its own language, which is not a dialect of Spanish, as is often thought. It's very different from Spanish, actually. And here you see Barcelona down kind of in the middle of the coast there. And then Priorat is where the red dot is. So that's, depends on how you drive. You can make it here in an hour and a half to 2 hours. Used to be a lot more. Used to be pretty hairy to get over here because the old road was really twisty and curvy. As you go down the coast and everything is fine, you're just scooting along, and then you head up into the mountains and everything gets pretty crazy. But that's where Priorat is. If you don't know where Spain is, I can't help you too much, but I'm sure that Google Maps would be your best friend there. Let's see, I don't think this opens in order. No, of course not. There we go. So this is the little doinky region, actually is Priorat. It's made up of 12 villages, officially 11 in terms of political boundaries, but in terms of classifications, there are 12. And very small region. You know, if you go from top to bottom, I think it's maybe 20 kilometers or something like that, maybe about 12 across. and it's very small and compact, but it produces a lot of very interesting wines. And there are a lot of very individual, unique terroirs within here. And the villages have a distinct character, which is why they started breaking them up with this Vila Vila classification, which I'll get into. I'll probably get into all that at the very, very end, because whoever's hanging around is really, really diehard and really wants to know about that stuff. So otherwise, we'll just kind of keep it at this. I will be tasting. If you have the wines at home, you can taste along as well, but it's not really designed to be a virtual tasting. I have 3 wines here from 3 distinct villages. One is Belmunt del Priorat, which is in the very, very south there. It's the furthest south village in Priorat. Then another one is from Porrera, which is a bit up and onto the east there, kind of the middle of Priorat, but also very coastal influence. And the very last one is up from Escalade, probably at the very, very top, kind of the upper northern limit of vines for Priorat. And there we go. And this is what's distinct about Priorat. This is our soil. There's about 85% of the territory is made up of this slate. This is called Vicorella. It's a local name for the slate, the rocky schist that we have here, which is most of the region. There's different colors of it, there's different compositions, but this is pretty much it. And the vines grow right down into this soil, and it is just freaking crazy. I mean, you look at this and you think, how could anything grow out of that? But the vines do, and they sink their roots usually down up to about 10, 15 meters or so, or even a little bit more, to kind of be able to actually cling on to that. So that's a really defining part of Priorat. And then just to prove it, here are some vineyards growing in a very nice vineyard up in Porrera. This is called Mas de la Rosa. These are Cariñena vines. And this was just before a very, very pretty harvest in October. It's a very late harvesting grape. But you can see there that the vines, they just shoot out of the soil. And these are 100 plus years old. And they're still thriving, still producing enough grapes, and really, really lovely grapes. It goes into a wine of the same name. And here's a nice shot of the harvest. So that was pretty scenic. I hope everybody can see that well, because this is Priorat. We have some flat spots around here and there, but it's very, very hilly. It's a lot of slopes. These slopes here are called custés. It's a Catalan name. It's the same word as côte in French, but it just means a slope. And we have them in varying degrees, from nice kind of gentle slope you can almost take a tractor on, to things like this, where if you slip and fall, you get pretty bruised up. And I've harvested this vineyard, and I have slipped and fell, and it's unpleasant. The ground is pretty unforgiving. These guys know what they're doing. They're going around doing all the hand harvesting, which is the regulation in Priorat. They're pulling it out 1 bucket at a time, and they're going to take it down to the winery. So it usually takes about 3 days to harvest this vineyard, and they kind of just sort of throw everybody that they have at it. So let me unshare this, get back to my beautiful face. There we go. So that's where Priorat's located. That's a bit of the soil. That's kind of what we have in terms of a makeup of sort of the overall scope of Priorat. Where did Priorat come from? Now the history goes back, 2,000 years or whatever. I'm going to just try and cover this as absolutely fast as I can. If you want more information, sorry, Moshe, I'm going to do this. I have a book. I have an excellent book. He has it too. Everybody should have this book if you like Priorat. But that's my plug. So it has a lot more details on the history there. And so basically, the old history is that the Romans were probably in this area, as they were in a lot of the Mediterranean. Do we have any proof that they're making wine here? Not so much, as opposed to like Barcelona. If you go to the City History Museum in Barcelona, it's super cool because you can go downstairs into a basement, and they actually have old amphoras where they were actually making the wine. So we know they're making in Barcelona. In Priorat, not so sure, but there's a good chance of it. Then you get into the Moorish period, obviously no wine production. Then you get into the Reconquest, where things start to get a bit more interesting. Because after the Reconquest of Spain, the monks came down from Chartreuse, from the Chartreuse order, and they established a monastery in Priorat, and that's kind of the start of the period that we have here. So the monastery they established is called La Cartoixa. And it was from this period where wine production got a bit more serious, and also the region itself started to take a lot more shape. So we have the name Priorat. What does that mean? Well, in English, it means priory. So, you know, that's directly where the name comes from. And it's thanks to the monks and this dominion of this monk that really formed the core part of Priorat. And just, I know a lot of people are probably aware of Dion-Montsant as well. This is also in the county of Priorat, which is a bigger region, but it's this core historic region of about 12 villages or so that is considered to be the original Priorat. And that's where the DOQ is based, in those core villages. So the monks were here. They had a pretty good run. They made it about 600 years or so. And then there were the Decrees of Menefable, which was an order by the Spanish kingdom for the religious orders to get the hell out. And that was in 1835. Things changed quite a bit at that point. Where the monks were gone, people started taking over and having ownership of their own land. And then there was another thing that happened. For those of you who live up in France, especially up in south of France, you've heard of this thing called phylloxera, which came through France, killed off the vines. And so then the French were looking for a source of wine, and they found it in Spain. Ironically, this continues today. Spain is a big source of bulk wine up to France. And so we see during this period, the later part of the 19th century, we see a lot of export up to France. On the kind of the middle part of Spain, you saw it out of Rioja, which is the kind of the foundation of the town Otto, not Hotto, not the H. H is silent, it's Otto. But that became a real point for wine to be shipped up to Bordeaux, up to France on that side. Here, that same kind of point became Reus. So Reus is it's a nice town, but it really blew up in terms of population in the later 19th century, because it was the point where they were shipping all of the wine up to the Rhone Valley, and who knows, maybe a little bit up to Burgundy to kind of fatten it up those days. And the consequence of that was that Reus grew quite a bit, and then there was a really big boom of the vermouth industry as well. So they were producing a lot of vermouth. They still produce a lot of vermouth today, not nearly as much as they used to. If you haven't had some vermouths from Reus, those are really worth seeking out, and there's a lot of really good vermouth produced there. So another little good side bit that happened there. After phylloxera, you get the cooperatives forming. This is something we see throughout all of Europe, kind of safety in numbers sort of thing, sharing the cost, making wine. Probably pretty shitty wine, to be quite honest. I mean, they're producing it in big underground vats. It was probably oxidized. They're just kind of taking everything, and there wasn't really a lot of sorting. So, it is what it is. The DO itself was actually established in 1954. So for Spain, that's kind of old. It's actually a pretty old DO in Spain. The oldest, if there's always kind of a battle between Rioja and Sherry, but I'm going with Sherry, as far as they've told me. That seems to be the oldest, and Sherry is just ancient as well. I mean, they've been making wine there forever. So you have this DO established, still allowed to kind of produce wine in bulk and sell it that way. And then there are a couple of events that came along, which actually I'll cover probably a little bit more with the wine. There's the Cartoixa that was released in '74 from Scala, which helped reestablish that really quality wine could be made in Priorat. Then a group of kind of hippies and misfits and some other kind of oddballs, and it's the collection of people who came along in the 80s with René Barbier are really an odd group. There were some people who were really dedicated in wine. Those are the ones who stuck around. And the other ones, didn't really work out. But in 1989, they released a wine, which was the Clos wine. And that wine really is what put Priorat back on the map, because that was the point where you had the Robert Parkers out there and the other big critics. Are there any other big critics? I mean, it's just pretty much Parker. No, I mean, he was kind of establishing everything. No one, don't tell anyone else I said that. But at this point, Parker and I'm sure a couple of others, they started really taking notice of Priorat in the 90s. Was when this Clos wine came out, and this is where there was a big push for wine production in the region. What happened after that? After this group, who everybody refers to as the Cinco Magnificos or the Cinque Magnifics, or the Five Magnificents, which is, and if you ask any of them about this name, they're actually kind of patently embarrassed by it. because it was this name given at the, for restarting the region and bringing it back and from a non-existence. I mean, when Renee, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Moshe.
Miquel, just to stop you there, because we were discussing a couple of days ago about the fact that even I got it wrong with René Barbier being an outsider, and you corrected me. So it's worth just maybe just telling people he wasn't an outsider, and also who are the five, if you can highlight that.
So the five, and there actually were 10, but it's just the five who were able to keep going and produce wine. The keystone in there is René Barbier. Everyone says senior, but actually it's René Barbier the third, because then there's his son, René Barbier, as well, who's also making wine with his wife, Sarah Perez, and eventually he's going to be taking over Clos Mogoló. So you had René Barbier with Clos Mogoló, very well known, very respected. I mean, I think everyone who comes to Priorat goes to Clos Mogoló. You have Mas Martinet, which went through a generational change about 20 years ago. I saw Sarah Perez, she came in on the chat here recently, so I'll speak nicely, but it's not hard because I love the wines of Mas Martinet. And so, but her dad, Josep Luis Perez, he was the engine behind that, as well as Sarah's mom. She was also Montse Ovejo. She was also really, really important, and she's a scientist, and she's super cool as well. And then you had Clos Tofi, Palacios. A lot of people, if you're in the United States, and if you tried Priorat, there's a good chance it was probably Palacios. He really set out and established a good presence in the U.S., and he's really well known. He has the most expensive wine in Priorat, and I think almost in Spain, the Ermita, which is pretty impressive wine. We can get a bit more into that at the end when talking about single vineyards and such. And then there was Clos Obac, which is Carlos Pastrana. And lastly in there was Clos Erasmus, which is Daphne Glorian, who is super awesome, and someone I chat with a lot whenever she's here, because she's actually lives in, I want to say it's North Carolina. I think she lives in Charlottesville. I always get it wrong. But her husband is Eric Solomon, who's a super awesome importer in the U.S. And she always jokes that Eric just married her to be able to get an allotment of Clos Erasmus. But she then, of course, jokes that he then, of course, says that she only married him so that she could have a constant distributor in the U.S. So But yeah, Daphne's great, and her wine is really great. Every year is very different, but it's always a stupendous wine that she makes. So that's the five, and they have continually been making wine since 1989. The original group, when they released the wine, it was all just a single wine released with their individual names on it. And fun fact, it was not actually Dio Priorat, because Dio Priorat, the minimum percentage for red wine is 13.5% alcohol. That wine was 12.5%. So it was actually Vino de España. So this wine that put Priorat back on the map was technically not even Priorat. I mean, the idea of being able to make a 12.5% alcohol wine these days is pretty kind of blows your mind, because there's a lot to deal with here in terms of climate change. But that was the main group, and they're the ones who did a lot of work to not just make the wines and deal with living here, because it was pretty tough to live here 30 years ago. But they also did a lot of work to promote the wines and get the region more well known and attract other people to the party, because you're obviously not going to start a movement with just 5 people. And today there's about 110 wineries in Priorat and about another 50 in Montsant, which is not bad for a pretty small little region like this. So yeah, was another part to the question, Moshe, or did?
No, it's obviously an important part of the recent history. So I think it's important that everybody get that kind of understanding of who they were. And in a minute, I'm sure that you'll cover how they branched and their influence nowadays, but we'll get to it.
Yeah, so after this group, a lot of family wineries started up. Because to that point, people were pretty much just selling wine bulk. You could go up to Barcelona and you would go into a restaurant or a wine shop there, and there'd be a barrel that said, Priorat across it, and you take out 1 or 5-liter jug or something of it, and that was Priorat not too long ago. Things have changed significantly, but there was initially this push by family wineries to get established and produce really higher quality wines. They pulled out of the cooperatives in the process, and then all of the cooperatives have collapsed, and the 4 that were remaining have combined down into one cooperative that still exists in Priorat. Monsanto still has a big cooperative presence in it. About 55% of the wine is produced by cooperatives in Monsanto, but things are changing there as well. And so you had the family wineries, and then you get people who came in starting in the early 2000s with a lot more money, building some pretty impressive structures and really kind of making some crazy vineyards. And of course, then what do we have in 2008? Everything just kind of goes, in 2008, 2009, we're sort of seeing a repeat of that right now, because obviously everybody who makes wine is not doing so well. And we'll see how that goes. But as a note, so you'll see that Priorat is DOQ Priorat, but back in 1954, it was just DO Priorat. It was in 2000 that the Catalan authorities raised it to this extra high level that we have here in Spain of DOQ, DOC in Spanish. And then it was in 2009, it was approved by the Spanish authorities and became officially a DOQ. So, and there's just 2 of them. There's just Priorat and there's Rioja. There was some talk of Ribera del Duero maybe doing it or some other ones, but no one has panned out onto it. So it's just pretty much stuck with these 2.
Miquel, just 1 second. There's a couple of questions that came in now from Liz Gabay, MW, asking, what is the average size of the vineyard?
The average size of the vineyard? I have no idea. It's just the problem is there's so many of them. I think there's maybe someone else could probably answer this who's more involved in the technical side of things. I think there's something like...
Sarah is here with us. I think you unmuted. So hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Maybe you can tell us if you know the average size.
At the end of the 80s, they raised just around 800 hectares of really old vineyard, just planted post-phylloxeric. So from the 80s to nowadays, we have been planting around 1,400 hectares. Mm-hmm. So now it's maybe 1/3 more than 60 or 70 years old, 1/3 around 30, 40, and 1/3 less than 30.
And the average size of a plot, if there is such a thing?
This is it's very difficult because Priorat is like, a difficult orography. So it's not more than 1 hectare, it's 1 hectare, less than 1 hectare, 1 hectare point something, then a little bit of forest or,
And I know there's big variations. Miquel will probably touch on it in a minute. Somebody else was asking about the average hectoliter per hectare or yield, but we normally measure it in hectoliter per hectare. And maybe you can, Miquel, get us back to the yield, the average yield.
It's, what is it, Reds? It's 6,000 kilograms per hectare, because we talk in kilograms per hectare, not per hectoliters here. 6,000 for the Reds, I believe 8,000 for the whites. Sarah can correct me on that because she has to deal with this.
Well, this is the maximum, but this is
that's
not
the
average.
Yeah.
This is the maximum. But in 2,000 hectares, we are making 4 million kilograms, more or less. I mean, it's like around 2,000 kilos hectare per average, and that means 1,500 liters
per hectare.
This is the average. So, well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to talk in terms of how much you get per plant, because you saw with those, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So in term, you saw those plants up there on the slope in Massa Rosa, they'll usually kind of talk about how much yield per plant. I think most people are going to be topping out about 1.2 kilos per plant. Keep in mind, that's what you need to make a whole bottle. But the reality of it is that those are trellis vines, those are more fertile areas, and it drops down to half that or to a quarter of that. And so some of the old vines are getting 300 grams only per vine. So while there are some larger vineyards around, like in the flatter part down by the Siurana River at the bottom of Priorat, you know, and their trellis, and they have a higher, maybe they have a bit more higher production. Overall, everybody is seeing very, very few grapes, and the yields are extremely small. I don't know. I mean, you probably, some of them you're seeing maybe 1,000 kilos per hectare, or even less, you know. And there's some tiny little vineyards you find, just kind of a little strip that's been handed down in the family, which is 0.1 hectares or something. On the slopes, they're very, very small. And finding anything on a slope that's above 1 or 2 hectares at most is pretty rare. So, you know, it's very small agriculture here. It's very labor intensive. And I think there were a lot of people, especially in the 2000s, that got attracted here because they saw that, you know, these wines were selling for a lot in Barcelona, and, you know, people were making good money. And then they got down here, and, you know, it's extremely labor intensive. I've made wine here. And so I, you know, on a personal level, not as a real serious project. And it's very hard to actually produce a bottle for less raw cost than like 6 or 7 euros. You know, that's kind of your very, very low cost of production. And so obviously if that's your main, your base price, your wholesale price is going to be double that. Your retail price is going to be quadruple that. So, you know, people aren't getting rich. The last I checked, René Barbier isn't, you know, he doesn't have a helicopter or a Ferrari. You know, Sarah has a pretty cool car that she cruises around in, but it's, you know, it's an old classic. So, you know, people don't get rich here. They survive. They do well. They're happy making the wines. Sarah's husband told me once, she goes, you know, you don't come to Priorat to get rich. You come to Priorat to make the best wine that you can possibly make. So, you know, I think that's the case.
Miquel, Alfonso from the steep slopes of the Amalfi Coast is asking, is growing an organic vineyard there, is asking about the how much of the production is organic.
They don't keep track of those. I mean, they probably have these exact figures somewhere in the DOQ, but they don't make them as public like they do with Penedès. I don't know. I don't have an exact figure. All the people that I generally talk to are working organic. Sarah, for example, everything is organic. Other people are in a process of a conversion, like a good friend of mine, Albert Costa, who's the co-owner of Bayac. He's about 80% organic. There are other people who are working biodynamically as well. An exact figure is very hard to come by because there's still a lot of old school production. You can walk through the vineyards and you see that all the organic matter is dead in the vineyard. So there still are some people doing, let's say, a less modern type of production. Traditional, I guess is what people like to call it. But it definitely does exist. But organic is definitely growing. And you saw that soil. I mean, when you have soil that's just a pile of rocks, you don't have to do too much to it. And also, Priorat's extremely dry. We're usually looking at about somewhere around 30% humidity normally. So you don't have fungal problems, and you're not going to have a lot of pests. And they are here, but having to do what they do in, say, like Bordeaux isn't really the case. So even if you're using herbicides and pesticides, it's at a massively reduced amount than other regions. So
I suppose it's it's harder because when the vineyards look like that, it's not that easy to get out to the vineyard on a tractor. Obviously, most of them are everything is manual. So it's a case of the choice is easy to go organic, even if you're not certified, because somebody was asking about certified or not. But so I'm sure that a lot are not certified, but fully organic.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing too is there are people who just work with it as their philosophy, but aren't really pushing an agenda of trying to sell that way. Like Clos Morgado is that way. I didn't know they were biodynamic until maybe about a year ago, because they just don't make a big deal about it. They don't put it on the labels. It's just the philosophy. And so, you know, that there are probably a few other people who are like this. Let's see this there. I think Rupert was asking a question about common misconceptions and errors made about Priorat.
Yes,
I like this question because there probably are quite a few. I think one of the biggest problems with it is how it gets listed in a lot of educational text. There's sort of that little one paragraph summary, which is, slate soils, slopes, high alcohol, Spain. And so, some of that's true. Obviously, Catalonia is still in Spain. But the high alcohol part, there are definitely boozy wines here. Grenache is 40% of the production, and Grenache can go up to 18% without really having to do too much work to get it there. And obviously, that's not what you want. But things are changing a lot these days, and seeing wines that are more at the minimum, even 13.5% up to about 14.5. Usually most wines are below 15 these days. So I think that the perception that Priorat is just big, boozy, alcoholic wines is something that has changed significantly. And I think if people, the last time they tasted it was maybe 10 years ago or even more, that they should maybe look into it a bit more. So that's one common misconception. I think the other one is that Cariñena is, I'll get into the grapes next, but one of them is that the Cariñena is not a grape for making monovarietal wines. It's just for blending. So not true. Cariñena is just freaking awesome. It's one of my most favorite grapes that there is. If you've looked at my website, you see that I'm kind of a bit of a fanatic about it and sort of chase it all over wherever I can find it. Because when it's made well, it's really good. But Grenache is definitely the star. It's really the main wine here. And I think probably one of the, there's always, people will see pictures of Priorat and have some idea of what it is. But until you actually come here, you don't really fully know what Priorat is like. And it's just these folded valleys and everything goes up and down in the elevation. And it's so strange because you can come to Falset, which is the capital of the region. It's right next to where the train station arrives. And you're at 400 meters. And then you're driving along, you get to Sarah's winery. And you think, okay, we're down in a valley. Yeah, okay, it's lower. And then you get up to Grate-Alpes, which is a very scenic village up on a hilltop. And you think like, wow, we've scaled the mountain. We're up at the top. And then, no, you're lower than Falset. So it's a very strange place. And once this whole thing that we're going through is over, I really recommend that anybody who hasn't been here definitely to come here and see it for themselves and kind of taste the wines in situ and sort of see what Priorat actually has to offer. And it's changed a lot as well. It used to be the case 15 to 20 years ago that there was not really anywhere to stay and some pretty basic food options. But a lot of that has changed. We have some really great restaurants. Hopefully we're going to make it through this period and some nice hotels to stay at as well. And so it's actually gotten a lot more fun to visit Priorat as well. And beyond that, I think probably one of the only things that still drives me just a little bit crazy is when I see some article somewhere and somebody writes Priorato, which is the Spanish spelling, sticking this O at the end of it, because nobody labels their wine Priorato here. Even people who are full Spanish speakers who've come to the region still call it Priorat. It's just, that's just the name at this point. So, and then there's probably a little bit of misunderstanding as well in terms of the village level classification. But like I said, I'll get to that at the end if people are still awake. So, I don't know, what other questions we have here?
Miguel was telling us about loss of Garnacha last year because of variations in temperature, but I think maybe we can arrive at the discussion about global warming maybe later on and mention that. Yeah, because it's definitely a point worth mentioning. But we threw you completely out of the presentation there with the questions, but it's good. People keep asking questions. Miquel likes the questions coming in, but one of the last points.
No, go ahead.
No, you mentioned the 2008 crisis, and I made a point from your book, I quote because it's chillingly suitable for these days. You write about the 2008 crisis that if Priorat is anything, it's resilient, and most likely this is just one storm that will pass its strong hills throughout the centuries. So it's again, I wanted to ask, how do you see the current crisis, although we're in the midst of it, compared to the 2008 crisis? But maybe again, we'll reach that later on. You can keep it and continue with the presentation, or
well, I think it plays into the history a bit, so I can mention it now. I mean, basically, Priorat has seen some shit. You know, this was just right next to the Ebro River, and so there was fighting just right near here during the Civil War. You go into some of the cellars in the lower part of the county, and they still have bullet holes in the walls. So, you know, the Civil War was super rough. The phylloxera crisis was super rough to Priorat. It's just been through so many ups and downs just in recent history, in addition to the fact it's a very hard place to live in historically. I mean, the village of Porrera, which is gorgeous. I lived there for 2 years, and you know, it's a beautiful village down inside of a valley, and a lot of really ambient life there, and it's a lot of fun to live there. And you have it. Yes, that's your wine. And I have one as well. But you know, that name means the translation of it is fear is behind us. So it was called the Scary Valley in Catalan before people started living there. And once people settled in it, then they said fear is behind us. So Priorat has been a very, very tough place to live in. I think the big difference between now and this whole crisis and the lockdown and everything is affecting us kind of all in a similar way, and that it's just paralyzed everything. The difference with the previous crisis was that it just was for, you know, it was for a set amount of time, and it wasn't like the whole place was shut down, so people could still come and visit. You know, not a lot of people were visiting, but the wines were still selling a certain amount, so there's still movement, even if it was heavily reduced. The big difference now is that it's, I think Sarah, I think you want to mute Sarah.
okay.
She's come back on there. I think the big difference now is just that everything is shut down. We've been on a really nice upswing. Everything's been building. We had like a really super great 5-star hotel just opened up about a year ago. And so everything was kind of really moving up, and it would probably hit a point like, well, it depends on how long this goes on as to how long everything can last. And as someone's commented there, you know, I think a lot of people, I've seen them come down, you know, they come out of, like, they hire a limo or something to come down from Barcelona, and they step out and they're all kind of dressed up like they're going to Napa Valley or something. And everyone's sort of a hick here, you know, everybody's just sort of dressed for working in the field. It's very, very rural. And it's a very small amount of tourism. There just really aren't a lot of tourists. You can drive around at harvest time and be the only car on the road. So it's still very empty. The whole county only has 9,000 people in it. And so it's a very remote, depopulated space, even though it's just over the hill, just 20 kilometers east of here is the beach, you know, and massive tourism development, but it's a very, very different world from all of that. So, and again, that's one of those things that it's very hard to sort of understand until you've actually come here and seen it. And you're just like, shh, you know, what, is there something going on? It's a holiday. It's like, no, it's just always like that. There's nobody around, you know, and that's kind of a nice charm to it as well. Should I do a little overview of the various grapes, or okay? Yeah.
Yes,
All
because
right.
I think it's important. Sorry, I know that Garnacha, for instance, has 2 very different Garnacha growing. So I think it's important to highlight that.
Yeah, I think Garnacha is really finding its own pace here in Spain. Thankfully, it's a great grape. It's a delicious grape. It could obviously historically be very alcoholic and very oxidated, you know, which is not pleasant drinking. But the new trends with Garnacha here in Spain are completely the opposite of that. You see over in the Gredos region that they're really coming down on alcohol. They're making very light, very delicate wines. And you're seeing that to some extent here in Priorat as well. I mean, this is very much the heart of Garnacha country here. And you're seeing wines that are lighter profile and easier drinking. It's still going to have some, you know, some oomph to it. You know, Priorat, it's difficult to make a really low alcohol wine without losing a lot of the character. There are some people who are trying, but it's, you know, that it's a core part of the foundation here. So so we have red and white grapes, obviously. White is a very small amount of production. It's only about 6%. But it is growing. Maybe about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, that was only about 4%. So you're seeing a lot more white grapes. But I'll get into those in a second. In terms of the reds, Garnacha is 40% of production. Maybe it's a little bit more. I don't have the most recent figures from the DOQ. And then, it's, it has a lot of appeal to it. A good friend of mine, Freddy Torres, he basically describes Garnacha as a puti club, which I think puti club is, let's give the nicest translation of that, as a strip club. It's a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable to drink. There's a lot of flexibility to Garnacha. I mean, you see it in a lot of different forms. You see it in sweet wines up in France. We have some of those here as well. You see it in oxidized format. You see it in rosés. I mean, it makes super rosé. And so Garnacha really has, I see Liz there. She she has a rosé. So, I mean, she's up in the heart of rosé country up there in Provence. But the Garnacha is great. I think everyone's really gotten a hold of Garnacha both in Spain and in France, and it's not this rustic, just kind of crap filler grape that it might have been 30, 50 years ago or whatever. Then you got about 20% of the plantings are Cariñena. So, and I was talking about Cariñena before. Cariñena is, it's not a strip club so much. I think of it more as kind of a smoking lounge. It's a kind of a more seductive sort of laid back kind of grape. It will not get as alcoholic as Garnacha. You can make it. I mean, if you really want to, you can make an alcoholic Cariñena. But usually it kind of peaks up around 14.5%, sometimes 15 in a hot year, and it kind of hangs out there. And then it has a super long maturation period, usually picking it kind of mid-October or even into early November in some of the plots. That's a little bit different than what you find in France, where usually they're kind of picking it by the end of September. So here they give it a lot more hang time, and it really becomes a big, voluptuous, crazy grape. And I've tasted Cariñena from all over Spain, France, Israel, Morocco, California, Chile, and there are some people making some really excellent wines out there, especially from Maule. I mean, they just super incredible Cariñenas they're making there. But in terms of probably this point, this kind of just super amazing, delicate transcendence that Cariñena can reach, I find that there's basically 2 points in Catalunya that really, really do it well, and one is Priorat, and the other one is Empordà, up by the French border. And it's for the same reason. You're about 20 kilometers from the sea. There's a lot of slate soils, a lot of old vines, very different style of wine, but they're both producing really, really nice varietal wines from Cariñena. So those are the two main grapes, and that's the two blends you're going to find. One of the wines that I have here is a 50-50 blend. The other one is 100% Garnacha. The other one I have is a white, so that's a little bit different. And I'll get to those in a minute. But after Garnacha and Cariñena, then you kind of have this big medley of grapes, and some of them, there's a few more than other ones. You have Syrah. Syrah is good. We're happy with Syrah. Syrah is nice. We've got, we got a good deal of Syrah. We have Tempranillo, which isn't so amazing. Picapol Negra, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir. There's like 500 kilograms of Pinot Noir that comes in. It's just one thing. It was kind of experimental, but somebody has it. And then you have Cabernet Sauvignon. And Cabernet Sauvignon sucks. It's Cabernet Sauvignon in Priorat is like that really crappy uncle that everybody has who shows up to family gatherings, and he's not so great when he arrives. And by the time he leaves, he's drunk, and he's even worse. And that's Cabernet Sauvignon in Priorat. You basically, if you pick it when it's, not too alcoholic, it's super green and it's difficult. If you wait for full phenolic maturity, it's going to be super boozy and alcoholic. It's going to be raisinning. It's going to be having tons of fungal problems as well, because the clusters are tight on it here. And there's one friend of mine who has a not huge amount, but a decent amount of it. And he says, what if that vineyard that he has it in had been planted with something else, as opposed to the Cabernet Sauvignon, he wouldn't be losing 5,000 kilos of grapes a year. So it's really a problematic grape, and slowly more and more people are changing over, regrafting it or tearing it out and replanting it. So it's, I think, thankfully on the way out, as well as Cabernet Franc, which, you know, so these don't work well. Merlot is all right though, you know, so that's, you know, that works well to kind of take the edge off of the Grenache a little bit. So whites, we have a big kind of mess of things. I won't get into all of it. Basically, just to say that Garnacha Blanca and Macabeo are the two main grapes. So those are the primary ones that you find in the whites. You know, there's a couple of others that people have been working with, like Vineyard, Xarel·lo, which is usually up in Penedès, and a few others. There's a lot of experimentation happening in the whites, and there's some cool stuff that's starting to come out in the whites. And I think there's really a big turning point in 2014 in terms of the whites, where that was a very damp, difficult year, but it was just super awesome for the whites. Most all the whites I've seen come out of 14 are delicious. I mean, they have great acidity to them, lower alcohol. And that point forward, I think the whites for the last, you know, 5 vintages have been really, really good. Any questions on grapes? Trying to see.
Joe was asking about the kind of history of the international grape varieties, and where do you see if there's a bigger role or just a similar role for international grape varieties, particularly about Syrah, he was asking.
So Syrah, again, I don't have the most recent figures. I think Syrah is somewhere around, I want to say 10-12% of the total plantings. It's definitely has strong representation. So there's, you know, Syrah is well liked. There's a couple of varietal wines produced out of Syrah as well. So it does well here. You know, it's a good grape in Priorat. Obviously, the tendency should be more to use Grenache and Carignan.
Right.
So wait, uh-oh, who's that? Okay. Hello, Marcus. So there's. So anyways, I think the thing of the international grapes is they arrived when it wasn't just this group who came in the 80s that brought the international grapes with them. They were already starting to be planted before that, because it was just the tendency in Spain. You see it a lot more in Penedès. You know, you see old international grape varieties like Cabernet and other ones in you know, up in that region going back 30-40 years or something, or in Bordeaux at the French border. But people have realized that these are not necessarily the best grapes in terms of blends. They're not necessarily the best grapes for the region, and with climate change, they're getting even worse. So there's been a lot of moves to get rid of the international varieties. That said, in terms of the whites, they're kind of working well. Like someone just said, like Chenin Blanc is surprisingly good here. Viognier has done pretty well also in Priorat, but at the higher altitudes. And that's really a key in terms of the future, is planting high and planting north facing to really kind of allow, so you can, you know, allow the grapes to actually succeed. But that's, yeah, so those are the grapes, and that's what people have to work with. It's not a bad selection. And I think people are doing some really nice things with those grapes as well, experimenting with some other ones, like one called Escandavaglia, which is a local grape that is hopefully someday going to be approved, because it means it has like probably the best name I can think of for a grape, which is Old Lady Strangler. I mean, that's a pretty kick-ass name for a grape, Old Lady Strangler, you know? So that one is really fit for the region. It's a local grape. It's from here as far as we know. Hopefully we'll see more of it. There's only one person, there's 2 people doing majority Scandinavian wines, but hopefully there'll be some more. I see that Claudia has a question about classic and modern style of Priorat. I think that's best to get into with the wines, because that was sort of the idea with the wines that I chose, was to kind of talk a little bit about where Priorat has been and where it's going. So I don't know if anybody else had any other questions. I think, okay, Liz Gabby, she's asking, no, it's Escandavaglia, that's in Catalan. It's
Catalan? It's in Catalan.
It's in Catalan. Escanya Vella. I can send you an email or right. Something. Yeah, there we go. There, correct. Yeah, which, I mean, it literally means like strangle old lady, which is, you know, or choke old lady as well. Is flexible, but it's pretty wicked. So, yeah, let's get on to the wines. Well, I can get on the wines. So you guys can do whatever you want.
Well,
First one I have here. Yeah.
if sorry, go
No,
ahead
go
with
ahead.
describing. No, I wanted to say, if people are welcome to write in the chat if they're drinking Priorat, or for that matter, anything else. If they want to highlight what they're drinking, feel free to share with us. But and I'll let you present the white wine there.
All right. So I don't have just any white wine. I have one from 2004, this is from Gran Clos. This is the winery that was down in Belmonte Priorat, so a very warm region, but a very classic style of wine. So basically, it's about 75% white Grenache and 25% Macabeo. And that's it. Vinified with oak aging. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, you can see the. Can you see the color? Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it's not amber wine, but it's damn close, isn't it? But that's pretty typical of sort of the aged white. But it's amazing. I mean, it has so much dried fruit in it, and it's, you know, and it's a little kind of caramelized orange peel and stuff. I mean, it's just all kind of tertiary notes. And it's a super aged wine, but it's, you know, it's quite impressive what it does. But that's pretty typical of what you found back in the early 2000s. You're going to find wines that were more heavily oak aged. I mean, what does this have for alcohol? Yeah, 15%. You know, so anybody who's kind of out looking for a Pinot Grigio replacement probably wouldn't be looking for this. You know, this is going to be a bit of a different style of wine. But it's what Priorat was making. You still find some of these kind of older, more sort of oxidative style wines in existence. I think someone who's doing a really good job of sort of clinging to the old style while still making it modern is Terroir Limit. Terroir Limit, I absolutely love their white wines. And I'm trying to remember which one it was, Terra Cucas or Pedreguix. I think it's Pedreguix that has sort of an oxidative style to it. But it's this idea to kind of capture the past and capture sort of this older style of Priorat with the wine. And I think it works really well. You know, you get into a weird thing with oxidative whites because it's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. I mean, again, if you like Pinot Grigio, if you want something just kind of fruity, if you want like a Riesling, if you want, I don't know, if you want Chardonnay, you know, from like a Chablis or something, it's going to throw you back a bit, which is really weird because I think for the last month or something, my wife and I have been seeing, or the last 2 weeks, we've been seeing the Viña Tondonia from Rioja everywhere. It's like everybody is drinking Viña Tondonia right now, which is super awesome. I mean, they need to sell it, and it's a super incredible wine, but I can't believe there's that many people who like it so much because it's really pretty polemic. And it's something similar with this, you know, it's, I love this. I think it's really super interesting kind of wine, but it represents what everyone was doing back in 2004 or before. You know, you taste some of these older wines. I think Albert Costa, he was doing a chat last night, and he opened up a 1996 Cims de Porrera, which was back when his family was still part of the project before they formed Bayac. And if I remember correctly, I think Sarah was the winemaker back in 96. Am I right on that? Maybe. But, you know, everyone who's making the lighter, kind of newer style of fresher sort of Priorat wines, you know, people were making a heavier, more oaky wine back in those days. Now, obviously, that's starting to go out of style. And I don't think a lot of us are really missing it. But the thing is, when you have some of these old wines, they're pretty impressive. You know, they've aged really, really well. And I think someone there's a family, which is San Genesi Vaque in Porrera, they do a really good job of aging the wines. You know, they see a lot of oak in their top two wines, but then they hold them back for 8-10 years before releasing them. And so they've really seen a lot of bottle age, and they're really nice and rounded, and the tannins are integrated. So there is a place for that style, but I don't think that it's something that can exist very well in the current market where people aren't going to bottle age or do what they do with Bordeaux, where you hold it in bond for 10 years or whatever. So things have changed quite a bit. And it was a nice period of Priorat, and it's where Priorat really, really grew quite heavily. and it's interesting tasting stuff from the old, these old days. Has anybody else tasted anything? Let's see, Patrick, he's got Black Slate Porrera 2015. That's a nice wine. You've got the Bila Bila, which again is from 14. I've got a 14 as well, but a very, very different wine than what you have, Moshe. Who else do we have here? We have someone who's avoiding drinking for 3 or 4 nights a week. That's fair enough.
Paul Kendall was saying that the color of the wine reminded him of V. Rancy. So I hope that you'll have time to tell us about the so-called Rancy wine of Priorat.
The rancid wine, yeah.
Rancid.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's something that it's probably even more of an acquired taste if you've never had it before. I remember the first time I had it, I just went, what the hell is this? Because yeah, the problem was the one that I tasted was actually still in progress. It takes minimum, I mean, if you're starting a new Biranci, it takes probably minimum 5-8 years or something to get going, and they really don't kind of hit their stride until maybe 20-30 years out. That's a pretty long time to wait. Yeah, Miguel is saying that Sarah has a spectacular Biranci, and it's true, but it's a different style. It's a Biranci Dos, which is a sweet Biranci, which some people like a bit better in the region because the sweetness sort of takes a bit of the edge of the Biranci off. But Biranci is, I mean, it's literally what the name sounds like. It's rancid wine. It's wine that has sat in a barrel or in a demijohn or some other way, usually up in the attics of the houses, and it stays up there for ever, and they go and just take a little bit off during holidays or what have you, and then they fill it back up a little bit, but it's intentionally given a bit of space for oxygen, for oxidation, and that's it. And it's incredibly simple in terms of what it is. It's just it takes an incredible amount of time, and you need to have good wine going into it. And it's pretty traditional around Priorat, and not just Priorat, but also Montsant, Terra Alta, Empordà, you find it up in the Roussillon, you find it as well. And it's a pretty unique wine, which I recommend anybody at least try. But I think actually Scala they have one. I don't know if they're going to release it soon, but I have tasted they have a Biranci as well, which is pretty tasty. But it's maybe going to be a bit of an acquired taste. Really great at the end of the meal, having it with a bit of nuts and dessert. And this is a dessert called the muzik, which is pretty traditional and really, really, really tasty. But I mean, I can't describe Biranci really. You kind of have to taste it to experience it. And we're not drinking. I mean, this would be, I don't know, like 3 servings of Biranci. If you drink it very